And Mayor, we're ready when you are.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to call the work session to order. And AJ, you're doing roll call?
Yes. Mayor
Okay.
Lundberg,
Here.
Councilors Van Gordon,
Here.
Moe,
Here.
Moore,
Here.
Stair,
Here.
Woodrow,
Here.
Missionary.
Present.
Okay, so everyone's here. We have one item on the work session agenda. It is budget adjustment discussion. And Nathan Bell is going to give us a report and lead us through the discussion this evening.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. And AJ, if you could make me a presenter. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, now how do I get back? Hold on one second. Okay. What I was hoping to do is see all the cameras, and I don't know how to see all of you and my screen at the same time, but I won't fuss with that right now. So back in May during the budget committee, we talked about coming back in mid-June to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on the city's finances and some potential reductions to offset those impacts. What we're looking for tonight is guidance on potential reductions, as well as revisiting some of the agency requests as well. Those could result in adds for us to incorporate into the budget for adoption scheduled next Monday on June 15th. In preparing for this work session, one of the things we did was we fine-tuned our revenue projections and shared that with our executive team, as well as a 5-year forecast that I'm going to show you here in a little bit, and use that as context for asking departments to come up with reductions within their departments. And we gave them a target of 3%. And what we asked for were reductions that wouldn't impact our outward-facing core services and reductions that we felt were sustainable, that we could make on an ongoing basis. And I'll be sharing the outcome of that reduction conversation. But I want to start with that context with you as well, and we'll start with the revenues. A lot of these revenues that I'm going to talk about here, you're already familiar with. I spoke to them during the budget committee as well. And for these revenues, we took a best case and a worst case scenario. And then when it was time to incorporate that into our projection, 5-year forecast, we used a mid case as a good number to incorporate in a 5-year forecast. So looking at our best case scenario, and these are the main revenues that we've identified that are going to be impacted in the general fund. And we're mostly focused on the general fund this evening, but I'm also going to speak to the ambulance fund. One of the biggest impacts we're going to feel is in our transient room tax transfer. And for all of you, the transient room tax is revenue that comes from hotels in the area. And as you all know, during the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we saw the occupancy rate in those hotels pretty much kind of drop off a cliff, and a lot of cancellations going out into the summer and the fall. So this is one, even as we start to reopen, there's still going to be a residual impact here. And we came up with our numbers again by speaking with folks in the community who had a good understanding of the impacts that we could expect. And our best case scenario is a reduction in transfer to the general fund of $474,000. Worst case, we're looking at $618,000, and for our 5-year projection, we incorporated a reduction of $546,000. That is a short-term impact, and with all of our projections, we're essentially taking the assumption that as the restrictions are lifted and we slowly move back towards normalcy, that will just continue on into the fall, winter, and onward. None of our projections would take into the impact if COVID-19 was to come back in a significant way in the fall and winter to where we were back into a shelter in place. That's the type of impact that would be such that we don't want to go there mentally, and we would only go there if necessary. So keep in mind that we're not building in an expectation for it to return in a significant way in the fall. Property tax, for coming up with this number, we reached out to the county. They put out a cheat sheet for agencies to help them in doing projections on the property tax. The property tax is going to have a short-term and a long-term impact. We're focused on the short-term impact that we're showing you here, and that's just in the form of delinquency. And they said to expect between a 1% and 2% delinquency beginning fiscal year 21. So in a 1% delinquency, we're looking at a reduction in property tax revenues of just under $240,000. Worst case, $475,000. Again, we took the mid case of around $357,000 for our 5-year projection. When I get to the 5-year projection, I'll speak a little more to the long-term impact, and that's mostly going to come from a recession. I think it was actually announced today that they officially said the recession started in February. Planning fees, we look back to the last recession to project the impact. Yes.
Sherry had a question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
we normally have a delinquency. What is our normal property tax delinquency? Do you know?
Yeah, it's run a range here over the years, but I think that, especially with the strong economy, we got down to, I want to say in the low 3% range.
Okay.
During the recession, we've seen it get as high as the high 5s.
Wow.
So when I talk about a delinquency of 1% to 2%, that would be in addition to what we're already experiencing.
Okay, so actually could be more like 1.3.
No. So if we're in the low 3s, we're looking at more in the low 4s to the low 5s on the 1% spectrum. Does that make sense?
Okay. So in actuality, this is just the additional decrease in income.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So based on this, for instance, if 1% results in a $240,000, then we've already built in roughly $720,000 in delinquency. And so this would add another $240,000 in the best case scenario.
Okay, thank you.
So back to the planning fees, we looked at the last recession to kind of come up with an impact. And in our best case, we're looking at a reduction in revenues of roughly $48,000. Worst case, $360,000, and we took the we took a mid case of roughly $140,000. And then the last one is our interest earnings. I think as recent as January, February, we were earning in our local government investment account, which is with the state of Oregon, where the bulk of our savings are deposited. We were looking at returns somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5% to 2.75%. Our returns on our investments has, again, to use the phrase, fallen off of a cliff. Right now, when we purchase securities, we're looking at getting returns in the neighborhood of 0.2, and that could drop even further. So we're seeing a significant impact on our interest earnings, and in a best case, next year, a reduction of $250,000. Worst case, it would include an impact in fiscal year 20 as well of $350,000, and then we took the midpoint. In here, I'm not taking into consideration municipal court revenues. They're going to be impacted, but it's really hard to gauge because what's been happening with a lot of those cases is with the courts closed, and they're not completely closed because we've moved to a virtual environment for what cases we can continue to clear. So a lot of those revenues will just get pushed into the future. I do think there will be some decrease in our municipal court revenues, but not enough to where I felt like it needed attention and needed to be part of this conversation. And then the other thing I'm not speaking to here are the ambulance revenues. We saw a decrease in transports during the shelter in place. A lot of folks just not wanting to go to the hospital. And I'm not going to speak to the dollar amounts on those. We talked a little bit about them before, but they're built into our 5-year ambulance forecast. And we already had a structural challenge with the ambulance fund, which I think we've talked about here in the past. We expected to be subsidizing our transport services in the future. What COVID-19 essentially has done is brought that point of that subsidy in nearer term. And so we'll talk about that when we get to the 5-year forecast. So before I move on, are there any other questions for me?
I have a question.
Steve?
The property tax delinquency, won't we get that back eventually in 3 or 4 years as back taxes?
Yes, yes. What that does is with delinquency, it pushes it into the future. But that's what we then are building into our model more that extended to the future. But there is an eventual impact of a recession on our property tax collections as well. And I'll speak to that here in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Sherry?
I just had a procedural question. I had some budget committee members contact me and they thought that they were going to be a part of this conversation. And so would you just explain, when we did the budget committee, they actually voted on the budget with the understanding that the council was, we give the final word anyway, but with the understanding that we were going to be the people who were going to hear. That was my understanding, but I'm thinking some of the budget committee members did not understand that as being the process.
Yeah, so I think that's how I communicated it. And what's challenging here is if we were to go back to that work session when we first came to you and said that we're going to need to do a virtual budget committee process and kind of in that real kind of time moment of just having that concern of whether we could get a legal appropriation in place while following Oregon statutes by July 1st, we came to you with a proposal that we would do just a single evening, a very condensed budget process with very limited conversation and deliberations. And so at that time, I think there was a general concern that the budget committee members could be shortchanged in their experience. And so it was suggested that, and I think it was actually suggested that we come back in the fall and revisit the budget and talk about potential revenue impacts and adjustments. And what's I think kind of further complicates it is in having that conversation, we all heard things differently. I mean, that's as it is in any conversation. And so at that point, I took what I heard and I started to communicate that to the group. And whether I got that correct or not is in question. So I think that might be the start of the confusion. I think secondly is there was also a recognition that we thought we would just do a single condensed evening, but that evening stretched into 2 full evenings where we had very robust conversations. We also had the department presentations pre-recorded, which historically we did our budget committee process in 3 nights, and the department presentations took up the majority of that. So by having those pre-recorded, and we also asked folks to submit questions, we got a considerable number of questions ahead of time that staff spent time addressing and answering and pushing those answers out. And so what was interesting is at the end of this process, I know that the budget officer, Neil Obringer, and myself sort of stepped back and said, wow, that was probably the most robust and kind of involved budget committee that we've experienced in a long time. And so in kind of coming forward and then recognizing that we hadn't addressed the agency request and having that conversation and agenda review, it sort of move up to urgency. Okay, we need to come back sooner and address this. And I think then kind of having to make that determination of whether it was going to involve the budget committee and what that would look like. And I think, and just in a sense of expediency and urgency, it was just determined that we bring the council back together, being that ultimately it is the council that is responsible for the final decision as it relates to the budget. So I apologize on that, Councilwoman.
Okay, well, so I think then we're doing this discussion. We're not voting on the budget, obviously. We're in a work session. So we will be voting on the budget when?
Next week.
Next
June
week, okay. And so, but we are looking at potentially at a coming together with the budget committee in sometime in the fall, if there is any, if there are needs for adjustments. Is that my
No,
understanding?
I'm,
Or not?
Sherry, I'm going to jump in because
Okay,
when we had this discussion about how to do this, because it was going to be virtual,
yes,
that put the department presentations as a separate, which was very helpful because then
Mhm.
they're online and you can sit and watch them again, whatever. I think I would recommend having them done like that because it did lead to more robust discussion. But because the budget was prepared before the COVID crisis and there wasn't time to really look into the budget again and make a lot of adjustments before the budget committee needed to do their work, that they would basically look at a status quo budget, and then the council was going to have to look at whatever the adjustments that were needed were going to be. I made the suggestion at that point to ask the budget committee to come back in the fall, but not as the budget committee, have them come back the way we meet with planning commission and have them do a joint council budget members and hear where we are, because
okay,
I just thought that if you're a budget committee member and you approve this basically status quo budget, all of these cuts need to have occurred, and then you don't see the budget again until the next spring, is that you would feel shortchanged as a budget committee member. But if you got to come back in the fall and kind of hear where the budget is and all of the adjustments that had to be made, you would have and could ask questions, at least when you got to the next budget cycle, you would have some sense of what happened and why the council made the decisions they made. So but because the department presentations were available online, the budget committee did get to have some robust discussion. And so when they made their recommendation, it really did come out more like a regular budget process, that they are a recommending body. They gave us a recommended budget,
right.
and the council is the one now that needs to make the adjustments to the budget and to look at the 2 or 3 basically issue papers that weren't handled in the budget committee, but they're all going to have to be dealt with in this scenario that we're seeing now.
Right. Well, because I had some questions and, about procedure and what we were doing, I just needed to have a clarification for myself and for the budget committee members. And I think they understand that it is the council responsibility to adopt the budget anyway, but we do require and enjoy having the community input from the budget committee members. So I'm not sure that just reporting back to them in the fall is, I don't know how they would, how they feel about that, but I think that's good that we at least would involve them in that process after we have a better understanding of what all is going to, all the fallout that's going to come from this. So anyway, thank you for responding to that question.
Mayor,
Yes.
I just to clarify for my own sake, basically we followed the historical procedure that we followed in the past, even though we only had 2 short meetings or 2 meetings instead of our normal 3, sometimes 4. We looked at everything, we evaluated it. When we got to the end of the second meeting, we had a motion and a second and a vote on the budget that was going to be forwarded to council and for council's deliberation. Am I clarifying that correctly? But that's the procedure that we normally follow. And even though we only had 2 meetings, 2 longer meetings, we followed the same procedure.
You are looking at correctly. It will be a legally adopted budget. We have met the requirements of ORS as it relates to local budget law.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, and
All right,
Nate,
thank you.
and I want to emphasize to Marilee's point, which is we really did do the process the same as we do every year. Basically, that the budget committee is a recommending body, and then the council has to make the adjustments or make any changes that get made to the budget. We do the same thing every year.
Yes, and in fact, what's unusual about this is to have something like this happen and impact our budget so close to the budget period. So, one of the things I'll talk about tonight is we had structural problems. These adjustments we're making aren't because of COVID-19 per se. COVID-19 sort of changed the timeline of when we needed to make adjustments. But in a normal year, the executive team and the budget team would have done sort of the heavy work around looking at the budget and making adjustments, and we would have brought a balanced budget to you. Typically, the types of changes that the budget committee makes are usually around agency requests and usually minor things. In fact, in this year's budget, I believe that there were some errata that came out of the budget committee, and probably more errata this year than I've seen in previous years. The only thing I think is unfortunate is that I might have communicated, I did communicate something different, and I think that there was just that expectation, and for that I apologize.
Okay. All right. So, any other questions? We'll let Nate finish his presentation.
Thank you.
I had one question for Nate. Nate, where would you say is the biggest set of variables? I mean, what's the biggest X factor? Do you think it's occupancy of the hotels? Is it property tax fluctuation? What do you think we're looking at that separates the best case from the worst case?
What separates the best case from the worst case? I think just the how accurate forecasting is, and so we kind of want to put some sidewalls on what we're dealing with, and that's where, so yes, I think with best case is that maybe all these cancellations that have happened in the transit room tax fund or with hotels aren't as bad as those hoteliers are feeling right now, and as we slowly come back to normalcy, that they start booking some of those events into the summer and fall. I mean, worst case is if the Ducks play to empty stadiums next year. I mean, that is a big source of hotel occupancy in the fall. That's where a worst case could come from. That could even happen without a hard or significant return of COVID-19 back to a shelter in place. That might just come out of just being prudent, what we've experienced to date. So it's just such an imperfect science, but we're trying to kind of put some side rails on these estimates and make good decisions based on them. Does that help?
What you're saying is that there could be a wide disparity in the occupancy of the hotels between now and the end of this cycle, whereas the property tax remains stable. I mean, the property tax revenue. Is that a possible scenario?
I think we're going to see delinquency as a result of this event. So when you say stable, property tax probably doesn't have as you can see on here, as wild of a fluctuation.
Okay.
The transit room tax potentially has.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Move on to the 5-year forecast. And can everyone see that?
It's very small.
Okay. Are you able to make it bigger on your screen?
I can read it on my phone.
Mine will open up with I can open up with my fingers.
See if I can't.
Oh, look at that. I didn't know that worked.
I didn't either.
Is that better?
Yes.
All right. So this is our 5-year forecast for the general fund, and this is something that we've been bringing to you on a regular basis, and we're always updating this. And so with this one, this would be different than the one that I showed you in Budget Committee, as we have now incorporated our impacts of COVID-19 into this forecast. And as I mentioned with those revenues, some of them are a short-term impact, some of them can be a long-term impact. I expect the transient room tax to be a short-term impact. And what I mean by that is I don't see any issue lingering in our transit room tax revenues beyond 21. But as it relates to property taxes, that's where we could see a longer term impact. And typically with recessions, it's slow to hit our property taxes, but then it's slow to leave our property taxes. With property taxes, fortunately, that we've seen such a boom in the residential real estate market is that we're back into a place where real estate taxes are based on assessed valuation as it relates to residential, not on real market value. And as a result is there's a significant gap between assessed value and real market value. And what that means is the economy can take a hit and the value of residential real estate can decrease, but it doesn't decrease to the point that it gets close to the assessed value. And this confused people during the recession because they knew their houses were worth less, but their property taxes kept going up by 3% every year. And again, that's related to it being based on assessed value. And it's only at the point that the real market value dips below your assessed value that you would start seeing a reduction in your property taxes. So we don't expect any impact on property taxes in the residential area. Similarly with industrial, I'm not expecting a significant impact there. If you look at our industry, I mean, there's some concern around Royal Caribbean, but outside of that, I mean, a lot of the talk that I hear is the potential for industry to be coming back from offshore into the United States. And so we're not forecasting a significant impact on industrial. The one that we're watching closely is our commercial. And the reason for that is with COVID-19, for years we heard that telecommuting was the future. For decades, telecommuting was the future, but it was a future that never came. And then in a matter of weeks, it came. And we've had to work out a lot of issues around that. A lot of companies have, but what we're finding is that it works. And so there's an expectation that a lot of companies might start to reconsider or revisit their real estate footprint, their office footprint, and whether they can decrease that for cost savings in their organization and having some folks work from home. And so, we know from the shelter in place and the restrictions that we had businesses that closed their doors. Some of those businesses won't be reopening, and then some of those businesses that do reopen won't survive. And so when you take that in combination with the potential vacancy in office real estate, we think that our commercial area could be impacted in the future. So in determining the impact of this recession on our property taxes, we looked again to the last recession. And what we found in the last recession is that we averaged growth of around 2.5%. And so we built that into our projections as well. And so I want to be clear with you, 2.5% is good growth in the property tax area. We prefer it to be over 3. I mean, 3 is kind of that floor that we aim for. And some years it can be as high as 4 or 5%, depending on if you have new industry coming in and investments being made and everything. But 2.5 is still not a bad number. So we're not building in doom and gloom forecasts here. We're trying to really kind of zero in on what we think is realistic in terms of property tax growth. That's probably the largest revenue, and I do see just a hand for Councilor Van Gordon, so I'll pause.
So when we're looking at this revenue forecast, so this forecast is what the new revenue estimates built in, correct? But not any expense reductions.
Correct.
And we do have a couple of industries that are on some sort of enterprise zone, and I don't know when they're expiring. Is that expiration built into the revenue here, or is that sort of like not planned for in this revenue forecast?
Yes, that's a great question. And this is what gets challenging for us in terms of, when I said we looked to the last recession as a guide for kind of what we could expect in our property tax growth. During that same period, what we don't know, and we have to kind of dig into the details, and we will here, but we most likely also had enterprise zone exemptions expiring during that period as well. And so that 2.5% may already include some of the impact of those enterprise zone exemptions expiring here in the next couple of years. I can't say that with certainty. Our hope is it doesn't. Our hope is that that is an additional boon to our budget when it does happen. And that was why, too, when we talked about that 5-year forecast originally, and it didn't look good, we weren't deeply concerned because there were a number of bright spots in the future. And one of those was the enterprise zone exemptions that would be expiring and the real estate coming back onto the books. So what we need to figure out now is whether we can say it's going to be above and beyond that 2.5, or whether it might already sort of be captured in that. Does that help, Councilor Van Gordon?
Yeah.
So, and Sherry has a question also.
So Nate, I just need to have this chart explained to me a little bit. When it's talking about the forecasted amount across the operating revenue across the top, that's the forecast, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so then the next, when we're talking about expenditures, I'm looking at fiscal transactions that have made this dramatic increase from 19.
Yep.
So
I
could you
know exactly
explain to me what that line represents?
And I apologize because with everything we present to you, we always kind of run that line of what level of detail without overwhelming our audience. And in this particular case, you zeroed on something that a little more detail might have been helpful.
It would have, yes.
Yeah. So the lion's share of those fiscal transactions is a subsidy to the ambulance fund. And I am looking at a sheet actually that I have physically printed, so I can't bring it up on my screen. But in fiscal year 21, you're seeing fiscal transactions in the neighborhood of $2 million.
Right.
That would include $450,000 being transferred to the street fund. And that's part of that 3% that we passed a number of years ago. We now increased it to 5%, but 2% of that percent stays in the general fund. That's the right way that we charge to our utilities, to both stormwater and sewer. Does that sound familiar?
Okay, yes.
So that's 500,000 of it, and that would be 500,000 throughout all the years. Then starting in fiscal year 21, we show an ambulance fund subsidy of $1 million. That grows to 1.2 million in 22 and 23. And just hold on 1 second. Actually, that subsidy stays roughly at about 1.25 million thereafter.
Okay, so is that what I'm looking at in the next chart, the ambulance fund 5-year forecast? And I see that it's $1 million and then it goes to.
You see that it has a deficit that is growing.
Right.
And so if we were to it, because we can't run it at a deficit. So to keep it running at a deficit, we are now showing the impact that it would have to make that fund break even in each subsequent year.
Okay, so if I transfer that amount of money up to the fiscal transactions, that's where it's going to, the majority of it's going to come from that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then just to kind of further complicate things here for you, in fiscal years 20 and 21, we also have $500,000 that we're moving over to the capital project fund for deferred building maintenance and ADA work. And we budgeted that in 20, and we will transfer that in 20, and it's budgeted in 21, but we don't have that budgeted in the outer years.
Okay, thank you. I just needed some clarification.
Yes.
So Nate, I just want to add a couple things. One, always looking at our ambulance fund is really, or the whole ambulance program is an area that we continually need to think about, because that's just such a huge chunk of money. And, how is there any way on earth that we can impact that deficit spending? The other is, because I'm on Travel Lane County Board, they've done their projections out for TRT, and for some reason, I think there's a rebound that's much sooner rather than later, because once people can return to going to football games or all of those things, which are projected not to be that far out, that it will bounce our TRT back up. And what I'll do is I'll check with Carrie Westland about those numbers, because she has them in graphs and in numbers that we can look like, specifically for Springfield numbers. So we can get a good idea what that would look like. And I don't know if you talked to her, Nate, and have those projections, but I was more encouraged, I guess, when I saw the project. They're really bad at the moment, but they didn't stay bad for
Okay.
a long period of time.
Yeah, that's positive. And I actually haven't talked to Carrie directly. Working on those projections was Neil Obringer, working with Courtney Griesel. And then also my understanding is she reached out to hoteliers, I think Travel Lane County as well.
Well,
But
well,
we'll
it might
reach out
it
again
might be,
and update our numbers.
well, and it might be helpful if I can get those charts, is to just send them out in a council communication packet so that we can see what those TRT numbers, you know, are projected to be over the longer term. That's it.
All right. And Councilor Van
Oh,
Gordon?
Sherry, wait, Sherry has another question.
Well, Sean had his hand up first, I think.
Oh, okay.
So I've got a question about the ambulance fund. When you look at the operating revenue decrease from the ambulance fund, it looks like you estimate that it's going to stay under where it's been the last couple of years for 4 or 5 years out, right? Like we should, at some point, we should get the same amount of ambulance trips, right? As we sort of open the economy and return to normal.
Yeah, what's challenging there too, though, is that balance between having backlog billings and just having some years where we kind of got caught up and had a little sort of unsustainable kind of revenue peak. So I don't know where that factors in. In putting those numbers together, Neil worked closely with John Follett and Monica Brown in Fire and Life Safety. So I wasn't planning on bringing up the ambulance fund. I think, are we good with the general fund?
I didn't have any more questions about it, but so.
Well, Sherry had one more
I
question.
have a question. So I'm wondering about the impacts of state funding that comes to us, particularly gas taxes that we use for maintenance, other funds that come from the state. I didn't see anything in here about impacts from state funding.
Okay, so on the gas tax, it is, and we heard from the state that the city of Springfield could expect a reduction in fiscal year 21 in the neighborhood of around $300,000. That is something, and that too will come back rather quickly. That is something that we decide we can handle and absorb. So we're really focused on the fund where we have the challenge. And then the other revenues that we do have from the state are in the form of liquor tax, which comes in directly as a liquor tax, as well as state shared revenue, and then marijuana apportionment and cigarette tax. And again, I think initially we thought we would see a bump in our liquor and marijuana, just from what we were hearing anecdotally, in terms of when people are forced to stay at home. But then I read an article that was also talking about the impacts that the closing of restaurants and bars would have on liquor consumption and sales. And what I don't know then is if we could have seen sort of a boost in just individuals buying liquor from the liquor store, but a decrease in restaurants and bars buying, you know, and so how does that play out? So originally when we thought we might see an increase, you know, it's really hard to say at this moment. But when you look at the dollar amounts, even if we do experience an increase or decrease, it won't be of a nature that will be material to the larger general fund issue. We focused on revenues that we thought would have a material impact on the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands right now, Nate.
Okay.
Wait, Steve, wait, whoa, hang on, Steve has a
Are we
question.
talking about the ambulance fund right now, or are we still on the first one? I have a question about the ambulance fund when we get to it.
I think we're moving on to the ambulance fund.
Okay. Then I have a question.
Yes. Yeah. It's simple.
Expenditures.
I've got it in front of me. Does everyone else have it, or would you like me to bring it up?
I got it. Well, I've got it on my
Great.
big computer up here.
Right,
Could you
me
bring it
too.
up, please, Neil?
Bring it up.
Nate, I'm sorry.
Yep. Okay. Gotta figure out how to do this. All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Make it bigger.
And how's that?
That's better.
I have my regular computer right behind this, so I've got it up there, nice big letters. Are you ready for my question?
I am.
Okay. Expenditures, personnel services, materials and services. Exactly what are those? Personal services, when an ambulance comes, there's usually a couple of fire trucks with it. Are we paying for the labor on those or just the ambulance?
In this fund, it would only be the ambulances.
Okay.
So materials and services, I think if I remember right in here, there's a dispatch contract, which is pretty significant. You're looking at all your supplies, contributions to the vehicle and equipment fund for replacement of ambulances. Those are the things just kind of quickly off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
I see Councilor Van Gorden's question. This is the numbers that we were given. That is a good question. You would expect to see kind of again though, the estimated actuals, I don't know if that's really been revised downward, how accurate that 6.4, but our actual revenues in FY19 were 6.2 million. There would be an expectation that you would resume back up to that. I can reach out to Fire and Life Safety and find out what informed their forecast as the revenue displayed.
That would be great. And like, I'll take my answer off the air.
Okay, but you can see from 17 to 18, without any type of event, we dipped from 6 million down to 5.4 million. So there can be impacts within these revenues that aren't necessarily linear. Any other questions on the ambulance fund?
yes, Joe has a question.
So I know that we went from internal to external in regards to expenses on the ambulance fund, operating externally now through contract. I don't see where that's a financial advantage. Can you show me where that's occurred?
Okay, so ask it again. I don't know if I'm following.
Okay, so we used to have our own city staff administering that program. It's now been privatized. And it was
Not totally. So for the largest portion, it is still city staff, which would be our ambulance billing. What we contracted out was just the fire med program itself.
okay. So there wasn't that great of a savings then, apparently.
There wasn't that great of a savings because there was a little bit of savings and it was worth going after. But now the new contractor, where we kept all the revenue, but then we had staff costs. Now that contractor is going to take a portion of that revenue to cover their staff costs. So there was efficiency, but not a significant savings. And I would have to circle back with you on what that actual savings was.
So the only
Go ahead.
So really kind of the only long-term savings is that we don't have to bank on giving them annual cost of livings or negotiated increases as fast and as readily and as big as the internal unions would be.
That is correct. Sometimes the private sector can do these types of things more efficiently and cheaper.
Okay, thanks.
And I think I do have one small answer. I don't know if it explains Councilor Van Gorder's earlier question. I do know one of the things that has happened for us is that we've lost a number of billing customers. And so there was revenue associated to doing billing for those agencies. But as I think we've talked about this before, is some competition came into the area and has slowly taken those agencies away. But I don't know if that would explain the numbers completely. Any other questions on the ambulance fund?
Nope.
Okay. And unfortunately, we're at time. I apologize, and hopefully we can still move through this here and get to the answers
Well,
that we need.
Yeah, Nate, I'm not going to worry about that because this is an important discussion tonight. There are a lot of people looking to us to make good decisions, so I'm not concerned about the time. We have an executive session, but that's not, it's very limited in who sits in on an executive session, so it's not as if we would be holding up the public.
Okay. And so,
And of course, I'm speaking on everybody's behalf, so I'm hoping that's okay that I said that.
I agree.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right.
All right, and the last document that I'm going to share with you is the general fund reduction scenario. And with this, I mentioned to you that we asked departments to put forward reductions. We asked for 3%. That really was just to get the process going. And some departments put forward a range of options that totaled greater than 3%. And so we took it within our liberty that if we saw more savings from a department, that we would take more savings from that department. And if you look at, for instance, the finance line, we had a target of 73,000, and we put forward a reduction of almost 100,000. With other departments, we didn't really see that opportunity. And again, to point to one is, the library, they put forward a reduction to their materials and services for their library collections of 52,000. When their total budget is around 90,000, we felt that at that amount, we wouldn't have a library. And so we took a smaller, but we can doable, more sustainable reduction. And the last one before I jump into just talking through these is I want to come down to the police reductions. In there is body-worn cameras. And I want to be very clear that Chief Lewis did not put that forward. He only put forward the 3 reductions above it, which were all staff positions. It was the budget team that put body-worn cameras onto this reduction proposal. And the reason for doing that is in the budget committee, there was a very robust conversation around body-worn cameras. And I know that there was a lot of support really by all of you, by both the citizens and the council. But I also know that the Chief Lewis spoke at one point and just mentioned that if it got to a point where we had to make cuts in the future, that it would be hard for him to implement body-worn cameras to then have to turn around and cut staff. I think it was at that point that there was a change in the conversation you were having where there was a recognition that, well, if we were going to have to cut staff in the future, then that you would rather preserve staff over adding a new service to our budget. And body-worn cameras are a new service. So having heard that general consensus, we took the liberty of adding it to this reduction proposal, knowing that then you would deliberate and make a decision. So I just want to be clear that this didn't come from the chief, and honestly, it didn't come from you directly either. It came from the budget team.
So Leonard and Sherry have their hands up. So what I wanted to do with this part of the discussion, since this is the absolute ground zero of the discussion for this evening, is let Nate go through, how the staff came up with these particular numbers, and then let each one of us talk about, what our preference is before we make any recommendations about the budget. So did you have another question though about it, Leonard and Sherry?
Yeah, I had a question just about this. Before we get into the body cameras, I had a question about the fire expenditures here. It says that we are going to unfund but not eliminate a full-time position. So how do we keep the full-time position without funding it, I guess is my question.
Well, so that is just sort of we just don't fill it. And so it's in the budget, but it never gets expended. Now, what we need to be careful of is the reason we don't like to do that always, and when I say we being the budget team, is that if it's still in the budget, it's still in your legal level. So what we can do is we could still potentially remove it from their legal level, but what we're technically not doing is cutting the position. Because there's a recognition that once you cut a position, to get it back, you got to go through vacancy review. As opposed to it's a position that just to get funded, you can say, hey, this is a position we have, we now need to fund it. Does that make sense?
So the position is going to continue to exist. It's just not going to be filled until we have money for it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
So-
Sherry?
So mine's a procedural question again. Just looking at this chart, it's mind-boggling to me because we're talking about negative numbers, and usually when I have negative numbers, I have that little, those little things around it that show that they're negative numbers. So the department proposals is that it would be a minus 46,585 for the city manager. Is that correct?
That
You're
is
not
correct.
indicating that it's a minus. And I know
I
it's talking about
apologize.
reduction, but it would just be clearer for me, being, the person I am, if these numbers were somehow designated as being reduction numbers rather than, so I'm looking at the department proposed amounts, and then I'm looking at the executive team proposed amounts, and I'm assuming the executive team was the head of all the departments plus Nancy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so then when we come down, your total reduction, then you're looking at 841,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, based on the column for the executive team proposals, not on the other column.
Correct.
Okay, it just is not, you know what you mean, but I need to have a little more definition of what all I'm looking at when I'm looking at this kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Okay, thank you.
Fortunately, as I knew what I meant and wasn't able to step into your mind, without you giving me this feedback, I have the same problem. And so this
Okay.
is good to know because now here we are live discussing this. And so whenever you see an opportunity to reach out to me sooner to where clarification,
Okay, thank
do it.
you. Will do.
Are we ready to
That's all I
discuss?
had.
Yeah, so
Okay.
was that, that's all that you wanted to go through with this
Yes.
page?
Well, I was
Yes.
just, I just needed clarification.
No, well, Nate, your question was, are you, and my question is, was that what you're at the point you want us to discuss it?
Well, I can either walk through these with some clarification, or if you've kind of read through and you feel you have a good understanding, you can go straight to your deliberation.
Okay, so there's two pieces. There's the deliberation on this page, and then there's also any discussion about any of the other proposals that were out there. So I'm looking to the council for, do you want to go through the other proposals first, or do we want to, I think that we probably understand where we are on this page. Do we want to discuss it now? I want to give everyone a chance to say something about this page, since I'm sure anyone who's listening in is probably, this is the page they are listening in
Right.
for. So
Right.
to go ahead and clarify this page first. And I'm looking, Joe, did you have a question?
Well, not necessarily a question. I was just ready to give my my thoughts and understanding of this entire page and discuss the body worn camera program, but I didn't know if you wanted to start that off.
But
If you had
we are, but I'm going to take the prerogative of reading my statement first and then let everyone else go around. Okay?
So we'll talk. Yeah, that's fine. But the rest of the stuff is, we can talk about the rest of the stuff after you're done.
Well, I'm just going to read my statement, then whoever wants to
Okay.
make a statement about any of it,
Okay,
we're
Okay.
going to do it that way. Okay?
that's fine. Yep.
Okay. So many have already seen this statement, but I'm going to read it anyway. These are difficult and stressful times. The murder of George Floyd was unacceptable, and the racist actions that led to his unjust death are ones that cannot be condoned. Our community will not support such actions. Black Lives Matter. In Springfield, we have discussed financial options to add body-worn cameras to our budget for several years, and this year we added the program to the proposed budget. At the same time, cities began dealing with the current pandemic and are making difficult budget reductions. We have heard the recent feedback from many in the community concerned over the proposed removal of funds to initiate a body-worn camera program within Springfield Police Department. I have heard the concern and I agree. I also prefer not to wait until later to start the program. On Monday, I will be recommending tonight that we fully fund and initiate the proposed body-worn camera program and encourage my fellow counselors to do the same. I support our law enforcement professionals in Springfield and agree the cameras are a vital tool which all police departments should employ. So with that, Joe, you wanted to take the next turn, and then Leonard
Sure.
and Marilee. Okay, Joe?
Yeah, that's fine. Or unless someone wants to talk before I do, that's fine too. So what I wanted to simply, I in regards to that whole page, Nate, that all makes sense. And actually, there's some people taking some pretty good sacrifices, and I thank them for that. As far as the, in my humble opinion, with the body-worn cameras program, I have been an absolute proponent of that for the last several years, and it's something that I wanted and I want to come to fruition, and that I, as a counselor, require it to come to fruition. And but folks need to understand that the postponing of it or pushing it back was never an attempt to eliminate, that was never on my plate. That was something that I understand. I want these cameras for sure, and I think the whole council does. But that's important in people to understand that. The other part is, and I hope, is the chief here?
I believe either the chief or Lieutenant Rapay should be
Okay.
attending. And so it'd be up to AJ to bring one of them up.
So my question is that, and I want to be very clear and as precise as possible, for someone to lay out to me that if we go to quote pull the trigger on this program, what is going to be the timing of that, and when can we assure our citizens that those officers are going to have cameras on their chests? Because someone, and jump into anybody, if we have our city prosecutor on or Lieutenant Rapay, there's a reason why we can't use GoPros. There's a reason why this program, these cameras are built the way they are, and plus there's legal reasons. So I don't want folks to feel as though that we say yes to these cameras, they're not going to be on the officers on Friday of this week. So I just want to I want folks to hear what the process is that we have to do, and if everything in the perfect case scenario, how it's going to lay out.
And Counselor Pictionary, I can tell you that Chief Lewis is on the line. He's just trying to unmute his mic right now.
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You hear you
Yes.
great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, welcome, Mayor and Council. Councilor Fisher, if I could just jump in, I'll see if I can answer. I think you got two different questions there, but I'll start with one of them.
Please do.
The body-worn camera program is, part of that is really dependent on our city's IT department. And in discussions with the IT director, there is potential for significant infrastructure modifications or additions. And so we got to keep those in mind as we work through this timeline. And I do have a little bit of a timeline. I can hit some highlights for you if that would be helpful.
Yes.
As we move through this project. And so if you look at it, the money obviously becomes available in July. And so if we looked at this program from July to September, we're going to hire the individual to be the project coordinator for this program and to oversee it on a day-to-day operation. So that starts in July. During this July-September time, we'll finalize the plan with our IT department. We'll do the policy development, and I'll tell you right now, most of the policy development has been completed for the most part. There are a few things we need to work through, obviously. And then we also need to kind of review some of the current vendor solutions out there. The last time we looked at this is how long we've been doing it, and the mayor mentioned it. It was back in 2015, 2016 that we went out and did a pilot project. So it would behoove us to do the proper thing and to go out there and make sure we haven't missed something. I don't anticipate that taking a long time. I don't think we have to go through the whole trial process like we did before, but we need to take a look at what's available out there and things that's changed since 2016. So that would take care of kind of July through September. And when I talk about these, they kind of overlap some. I don't want to make it sound like this is, we do want these 4 things and we jump to the next 2. They're going to be overlapping. But so September through November, gives a chance to communicate with our stakeholders while we're doing some of these other things. That's like the district attorney's office, the hospitals and schools, to find out what their policies and protocols are for when our officers come to their facilities with these cameras on. So we want to make sure that that's not a surprise to anybody. So we'd be doing that. And then I guess I look at through October of 2020, right into the first of the year, January 2021, we're going to develop our training program, our plan for our trainers, for the line officers and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, and put that training program in place. So if things go well and the IT solution works fine, I would feel somewhat confident to say that probably by February, sometime in February, we'd actually be issuing the hardware to the officers. Obviously, there's always going to be some issues regarding the hardware and you start a new program like this, but I feel pretty confident that, again, if the IT solution doesn't set us back, and I don't want to really speak to that because I don't know the magnitude of what they have to go through to make this thing work. But I think we could probably have cameras February, March of 2021. And then if I could just kind of chime in, you mentioned, somebody mentioned GoPro.
I did.
Maybe that's a solution. The problem with that, the GoPro, it sounds like an easy, quick solution, but there's a real management system that has to be with these cameras. I mean, we have to be able to archive the files based upon what the incident was. Some you only need to keep 6 months. When I say some, I mean talk about the videos that are taken by the officers. Some need to be taken, kept much longer than that, depending on the level of crime they are. You've got to be able to have a sharing mechanism so that we can send files to the district attorney's office, to the public defenders. And while a GoPro system sounds like an easy way to go, it's really kind of a simplistic system that wouldn't really work well at all. And it'd be a management nightmare trying to make these copies and send them to the different people who would request them. So I hope that kind of hits some highlights for you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And just to, sounds like the potential time delay because of the IT that's maybe stretching from September to November potentially is that have you looked at or can you look at concurrently if that is outsourced, and if that's outsourced, if that is going to be a time saver, and if it was outsourced because of the load that we currently have on IT, if it is outsourced, then obviously it wouldn't be putting additional load onto our IT, but it would be critical to know how much that would cost and how much of a time savings that would be, because I would love to be able to see these cameras in place by the 1st of January. So at least folks can say, we got it by the 1st of the year, and I know that's propelled, but maybe outsourcing can create that kind of time savings. I just don't know, but at least we can tell our citizens that from what I hear from you, that they'll be on the officer's chest by February 2021. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I don't think I have an answer for the cost or the capability.
Right.
That
so maybe
IT would have to be able to do that.
Right. Maybe you can come back to us, and if there's an additional cost, then the council would maybe potentially look at that and say, okay, let's do that instead, and then do an addendum to the budget.
Okay, we do that. And then the other thing I think I forgot to mention too was, I think it was at the council's request prior that we can give you periodic updates, whether you want them monthly as we go through this process, so everybody knows kind of where we're at and if on target.
I absolutely want to be able to know, because I'm sure people are going to be very curious, and I want to be able to answer them directly, knowing that it's factual and saying, yes, this is where we're at. We're still moving forward, as opposed to them out there wondering where it's at and if it's been stalled. So that type of information is, I think, is critical. It is for me, and I would appreciate updates on that on a very regular basis.
Okay.
Chief, I think monthly is probably what we're talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
Got
So,
it. Yes.
sorry, I took a bunch of time, and I know there's 5 others, but those were questions that I needed to have answered for myself. Thanks.
Okay, so the next hand that I saw was Leonard.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Oh.
I guess
Wait,
I've certainly
don't
never been a
let-
police officer.
Well, Leonard,
Wait,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Go ahead, Joe.
One last part is that I am absolutely for getting this program going, and so that's where I'm at with my support. Okay.
Okay, all right, Leonard.
Thanks. So I have certainly, in my checkered professional career, I've never been a police officer, and I don't know what the stressors and what the advantages are going to be to this camera program for the officers. But I can say what the trucking industry generally does with their cameras and how it regards the cameras. The good drivers in the trucking industry welcome the onboard cameras because it protects them in the long run from irresponsible conduct on the part of the public. In other words, the good drivers trust their own driving more than they do the public's. And so I would think that as an officer, and we have a fine bunch of officers here in Springfield, I would think that they would welcome the opportunity to have these cameras to exonerate them in the case of an altercation with the public.
I think you're exactly right. And I think the only hesitation you kind of hear is probably from the older officers, just because of the new technology and that sort of thing. But everybody we've talked to, every agency that's gone to them, there's always that little bit of hesitation because we want to get in the technology. And plus, it does take away a little bit of time off the street for the processing of each day. But most people say once they have them, they'd never give them up. And I have my thought is that's what will happen here. We have great officers here, and there's no pushback regarding this. We've been talking about this for a number of years. The officers are expecting them, and it should work out very well. And I agree with what your comments are.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, I have Marilee.
Yes, yes, I wanted to just make a couple comments. One is that I am in full support of moving forward on the cameras. I was involved in the Police Advisory Council many years ago, and when we were talking about these, and it seems like every time they come up, there's something that keeps us in the shallow end of the pool, and we don't get to the deep end because something stops us. And it's time to get there and to just dive in and get it done, because it's something we've wanted for a long time. And I've read every email that's come in, and to a person, this is a response to our community, and that's what we're here for. So I look at this as being a positive response that goes 360. It includes us, it includes the community, and it's something that can enhance our law enforcement. I really don't see a drawback to it. I think it enhances it on both sides. I'm very proud of our department, and I'm proud of our officers for the most part. And I think it enhances our community interactions on both sides. I want to agree that I think a monthly report on this would be very good. I had the same concerns coming from the idea of the IT. If there's any way that we could speed up what they need to get done, be it within the program, if it needs extra money put there, or if we, as Joe mentioned, outsourcing it or whatever. But I think if there's any way to get that to be a shorter period of time, that would be really helpful to get them on the street as quickly as possible. What else did I write down here? No, I think that's it. I think that just the idea that now's the time. We just make the decision and go forward. And if we can have a date certain or as close to certain as possible as to when we're going to have them on the street, then we can be responsive to the people that have cared enough to get in touch with us and let us know what they think. because I appreciate the community and we were overwhelmed with emails. I appreciate the fact that people care enough to let us know what they think and how they felt about the situation. I would much prefer to have 150 emails than none. So I am appreciative of the community and thank them very much for having gotten in touch with us and let us know how they feel. And thanks, Chief Lewis, for all the work that's gone into this, and we'll just keep moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Sherry?
Okay. Well, I had a couple of concerns. So explain to me, when we're looking at this department proposal, the chief had proposed community service officers being eliminated, a record special, some of these other things, which, so I needed to understand whether or not, yes, we were saying we would eliminate those two positions. Are we only looking at the body camera elimination? So please explain to me what that is all about right there.
Okay, so that's what he put forward as his proposed reduction to meet his target of 477,000.
Okay.
What the budget team then did was, looking back to the conversation at the budget committee, when we heard that you would prefer to keep staff over adding the body worn cameras, we took the liberty of putting the body worn cameras on here, and we put that over into the recommended column.
Okay, so what I'm concerned about is eliminating these community service officers. I'm thinking that, you know, if we're not going to eliminate the body cameras, then I don't want to eliminate any of those other
So,
items
Councilor
that are
Moore,
listed.
no one's recommended that. They're in a column. The only column you should be focused on is the right column.
The
So
executive team?
Off of that column, it doesn't
Right.
automatically push something else back on. Only
Okay.
your action could put something into that right column.
Okay, okay. So then my other question has to do with, you know, I also am in favor of body cams, but I'm also very realistic about the ongoing costs. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that about, you know, I realized that I was writing, oh, I can't touch the screen. Okay, I was writing a letter in response to the many, many emails. And one of the concerns has to do with, my understanding is that it requires a lot of storage, which is one of the IT issues. There is a costly software that needs to be re-upped every year. Is that my understanding, license?
That
And
is
then
correct.
we need to also hire a full-time employee. So could you kind of give me an idea of what the ongoing costs would be?
Yeah, so the ongoing costs, they're both known costs and unknown costs.
Okay.
So this $350,000 figure actually was an earlier figure that sort of has continued to live as sort of an identified annual cost. But I can break that down for you. What that includes is a hiring of a position that fully loaded would be around $140,000 annually. It includes $67,000 in annual software costs.
Okay.
And then
Licensing fees.
Another impact that I think isn't always recognized, and this is where we reached out to the city of Eugene, and when they implemented body-worn cameras, they looked at sort of those sort of immediate hard costs, like the technology and the position. What wasn't taken into consideration, they maybe just didn't have enough to go on, was the impact that it would have on both their defense, indigent representation, and their city prosecution. So what this includes is $80,000 for the increase to the cost of court-appointed attorneys. When we looked to the city of Eugene and talked with them, they said expect that increase to go from 20 to 30% higher. Naturally,
okay.
goes to the lower side of it, which was 20%, and that's what the $80,000 recognizes. We didn't build in any cost for the impact of the city prosecutor contract. So the cost that I just described to you total $300,000. 220 of that will live in the police budget. 80,000 will live in the finance budget because indigent representation is part of courts, which is part of finance. The 50,000 recognizes sort of some unknown impacts, those being additional IT costs, those being the impact to our city prosecutor contract. And then finally, we mentioned just some inefficiency around each of the officers in terms of managing their cameras, and the question of whether that could result in some additional overtime on police staff. So we sort of put about a $50,000 placeholder in there for these unknowns. So we've identified 300,000 of hard costs and 50 unknown, but the whole program is roughly $350,000 a year annually.
Okay, so, but that's the initial cost of actually getting the cameras and that sort of thing is partially going to be covered by some federal funds or some, so that's not included in this 350?
So we don't know. We're applying for the grant, and I believe that that isn't built into the budget at this point. But what we could see potentially with grant funding is that it would cover the initial technology expenditure. So no, that the initial technology expenditure is not included in this 350. This is the annual ongoing cost.
Ongoing cost.
Which matters to us from a perspective of long-term forecasting and the impact over the 5 years. The technology, purchasing the technology is around $155,000, and it is our hopes that grant funding could cover most, if not all of that.
Okay, so so I'm looking at, these are, if we take the 350,000 off, then we're looking at a reduction of about 500, about $500,000. Is that what I'm understanding then here?
Roughly 490.
490,000. Okay, so that's without looking at the additions that we are going to be discussing added to the budget.
That is correct.
Okay, I think I have a clearer understanding. Thank you.
So I have, so Sean?
I guess a couple of points. I'm in favor of leaving the body cameras in. I think, that's the right thing to do in responding to the community. And, we're just in a moment right now where trust between the community and the police, is frayed a little bit. And we have to start talking about that and being willing to deal with that. One of the things I would tell you, Chief, is as we go through the implementation, being very open, like give us the update, absolutely, but find different ways to sort of talk to the community about what's happening, why it's happening, what the sort of the rules of the road are going to be, and sort of invite them into the process is going to help. One of the common questions I saw in the email is like, and don't make sure anybody, have a policy that says nobody's gonna, can turn the camera off, right? So there's clearly more questions in the community about what this means. I know as we go into the fall, we're gonna need to have probably, A, lots of updates, and B, continue to discuss about how we want the community to be policed. But that's, I think, a longer, broader conversation. The other thing, just I did get a little bit of feedback from some business owners in town that offered up money to help pay for them. I would be open to, just, putting a general ask out there from a nonprofit perspective. I sent that information on to, Christine and Nancy, but I think there's probably other people that would help where appropriate. And then, let's see. Chief, you brought up the point about hiring a project coordinator. When we did the initial work session about the project coordinator, I think one of the things you said is you lacked the certification to sort of manage a project like this out of the police department. I would just encourage you to use that opportunity to find somebody to get that certification as you go through this. I don't know how that would work, but there's a good opportunity to have, build up your bench strength. And I think, go ahead.
If I could just comment on that, it's probably poor choice of words on my part. I mean, the project coordinator is the same person who's going to manage the program going on. For this program. It's not two different people, and that was my fault the way I worded that.
Oh, okay. I heard two different people. Perfect. And then I think lastly, and when I look at the overall 5-year forecast, especially if we're going to leave the body cameras in, like we're going to have to go find more money, right? Like, and I know the executive team and staff's going to go back and work on that. But like, I just want to say this out loud so that we recognize the fact that there's still a big difference between how much money we're spending and how much money that we're taking in. And it's going to become some really difficult conversations. We'll get it figured out. But I'm walking into this with the understanding that like cutting $500,000 out of next year's budget isn't going to be enough. We got to find more money.
I would agree. And I heard your comments about sharing with the public. I think in my mind right now, I've got a couple ways to do that. One, maybe just some simple Facebook updates. We have quite a Facebook following right now, and we could kind of provide that, a monthly outreach to the community, kind of tell them where we're at, something like that.
Shoot video, like just right now where we are from a conversation perspective, you out there talking about what the police department's going through is invaluable to folks. Shoot video and invite them to ask questions.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Steve?
We're entering a few years of negative physical income, and I hate that. And I'd love to use that $350,000 for something else, but we are responsible to the citizens that voted us in. We're supposed to represent them and do what they want us to do. And everything I get from the public is that they want those body cameras. So I will support that.
Okay. So I think with that, we've got, Joe, did you have anything else?
Just a short thing too, Chief, and I wanted to put this question forward, is that this may be an opportunity for which, and I'm not sure where EPD is going with their current program. I got wind, I thought that they were maybe looking at a different platform, and I may be wrong. And I'm not sure do you know if the sheriff's office uses body cams? I'm not sure. I don't think they do. But if they do, it may be an opportunity for the agencies, the local agencies, to create a consortium that may have some cost savings through just size and numbers. There's this fancy word for it and I forgot. But anyway, that may be an opportunity, but certainly worth looking into to see what their future plans are.
I don't want to speak for the county. I know currently they don't have a program, and I don't know if they're planning on going to one right away. And then I haven't heard that Eugene was changing their platform. I think they're staying with the Axum.
The Axum, okay. So then that may be an opportunity for us to piggyback with some of theirs and plagiarize some of the equipment or policies and some of the agreements that they have, and maybe quite a cost savings and time savings.
Yeah, and we've looked at that was part of the reason we chose that originally too, because it makes it very simple for the district attorney's office to be able to, they've got a mechanism to share it, and we can just piggyback on that also.
Right, and because you're going to have the same readers and same people pulling those files off the cloud, and you're going to have the prosecutor's defense, the defense consortium, Lane County Public Defender Service, and the DA's office. If it's all one platform, I think that would be a huge savings all the way across for all partners.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So Nate, I think you have plenty of direction on that. Thank you, Chief. I know it wasn't, it was the COVID crisis that threw us into a budget problem here, but it's been a problem that's been building up, and Nate, you're correct that it just bumped it sooner rather than later. But our job is to pick the priorities for what the city services are going to be. So this will be a trade-off in terms of services, and that's but this is important enough that we need to deal with the situation locally that goes all the way to national and international. So I'm hearing that the council wants to move forward now, And then we will need to ask staff to help us make sure that we understand the budget very carefully as we go forward, because we're going to have more discussions about the budget as a whole, and we're going to have discussions about police services also as we go forward. So with that, we still have, I see on the screen I'm looking at, we still have the 3 requests that were outside of the budget process that were submitted by outside agencies. So looking for any feedback about those, whether to fund any one of them. So looking for anybody's feedback on that. Sherry?
So I'm specifically looking at the Square One proceed, this request for $60,000. Again, housing is a high priority for us, and I'm not sure that I understood this to be. I guess I'm curious about how fundamental their need is for the $60,000. Is there another way which they're going to be able to come up with that? I really like to see this project go forward in Springfield for the low-income housing and for people who would actually own that housing. So I'm in favor of it. I'm also aware that it's $60,000 that we don't have. So that's where I'm at. Oh, and the $12,000 for the Emerald Arts Center. Again, they're a nonprofit. Is that my understanding? How do they get their funding?
They're a nonprofit.
Okay, so but do they get funding from donations to maintain their programs?
They do art shows, they do classes. I mean, they have a variety of programming that is typically where they get. Right now, I think that it's an all volunteer organization. It's one of the reasons that I agreed to do the mayor's gala, is to help raise money.
Right. Okay, so again, it sounds like it's pretty important, this $12,000, but again, it's part of the money that we don't have. So it's one of those, gosh, do you buy the kids shoes or do we eat this month? That sort of a thing.
Okay. So maybe I'll just, the Arts Center, I consider that building, they've got some of our most significant murals are on that building. So although the Arts Center owns the building, it's important to make sure that that building is maintained, lest we lose those murals that are so significant. And they're a big part of who we are in downtown Springfield. I'm going to recommend that Square One Villages come through the CDBG process next year, because then they'll actually put in there. I had so many questions with their application that they would have a better opportunity to clarify exactly what they're asking for and how that system works in the CDBG process. And the CDAC could look at those applications first and fit this proposal in that process for going forward. So that's just a little feedback from me about those two. So Sean, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was supportive of the Emerald Arts Center as well. Like, that building's got too many assets that are important into Springfield, sort of downtown and heritage to, for us not to put a little bit of money into. And the Square One, I want to see it go forward too. I know but I think leaving it for the CDBG process is probably the best opportunity, and that'll give them a little bit more time to continue to develop the model. It's pretty innovative, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about it. But I think channeling them towards that process would make sense.
Okay. Marilee, and then Joe.
Yes, I'm in agreement. Emerald Arts Center I had as a priority as well. It's $12,000 isn't that much to preserve the heritage, preserve the murals, make sure we're not going to drive in downtown one day and have the building falling apart. So I think that I think
Or
it's worth
burning
the
down.
maintenance. Pardon?
Or burning because of electrical issues.
So yeah, so I think the maintenance and improvements, I think it's a worthwhile investment on our part. I had the same idea with the Square One Villages. I like the idea. I think it's a great idea. I'd love to see it take place in Springfield, and I do think that the CDAC is the place for it to get more formalized, so that they and we have a better understanding of what they need and how they have it all set up. Here I sit as chair of the Human Services Commission, and I'm looking at the requests. And as much as I like the requests that are out there and I'm in favor of them, my priority sits with the body cameras at the moment. I just, we have to decide and make decisions one way or another, and I'm just at this point that goes to the top of the list. So I'm looking at what was requested on behalf of the Human Services Commission, and my biggest issue that I was in favor of was creating another route of Meals on Wheels for the seniors. We don't often do much for the seniors, and so that was creating another route. So my personal feeling is I would like to come back and revisit the possibility of being able to figure out how to fund that extra route of Meals on Wheels to the seniors. And maybe we can be in touch with Senior and Disabled Services in Lima Lane who puts it through, who works it through. Maybe we can figure out between the three of us in partnership how to get that other route out there for the seniors in Springfield, because it certainly is an immediate service that would benefit the community. But I'm sitting at this point, okay with the money towards the Emerald Arts Center, CDAC for Square One, and maybe revisiting the possibility of another route for the seniors Meals on Wheels.
Okay. Other discussion about this, Joe?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm not sure the background I'm hearing, but I am absolutely in favor of the Emerald Arts Center request. It is our building. We need to make sure that it is safe. It's not something I feel that is an option. It's not something that is wanted. It is something that is needed, and it's a safety issue. So it's a no-brainer to me. It's also very low cost compared to the other side if someone was to be injured or the building to be damaged beyond just some maintenance things that need to be, sealing up the windows, if I recall. So and I think it's a great idea. Square One Villages, go back to CDAC. I think that's appropriate, and that's, as Councilor Moore indicated, that's a housing thing, and I think that's where CDAC should. That's their wheelhouse. And so with the HSC, I think that I don't think we should basically fund them right now, but I like the idea of definitely going back. They can come back for an ask down the road just a little bit to see after where we're at. I like the idea of the senior meals program. I think that's invaluable, and I think it's gonna, the needs I think it's gonna be increasing rather than decreasing. So I am definitely open to looking at that as an addendum budget item down the road.
Okay. Other input? Sherry?
So I have a question about this homeless outreach individual. And maybe you could answer this, Mary Lee, you know more about what's happening. It says it's the Lanes County and City of Eugene have begun implementing homeless street outreach and want to ensure Springfield residents are incorporated into an overall regional strategy to reach people not currently connected to services. So how does that work? Do you know anything about what's happening in Eugene and Lane County support for that?
Are you asking me?
Well, I'm asking, I don't know.
Right.
All I have is what I'm reading right here.
Right. It hasn't been completely formalized, but it is part of what the TAC came up with in order to create a coordinating a venue for people to, like you said, not connected with services and how to get them connected with services. And I think that Sean helped me out here with her name, Sarai. is just a new hire, and I think she's coordinating and putting those things together. But I don't think that I personally don't think that there is a full formalization as to what that what that position will do. And that's another one I would revisit, but I don't think at this point in time that we have a formal explanation and description as far as Springfield's concerned.
Okay, well, that was my concern. And then because I'm also aware that people on the streets are a real important part of this whole community outreach. Some of the issues with policing and intervening and being available, and you know, so I'm wondering if that person might fall into some of that category of a community service officer, you know, do that kind of work, or is that just a separate total? So I guess I do need more information about it before I'd be willing to fund it, but it is something that I would like to look at as being part of what we need to do. People on the streets who are going to be helpful problem solvers.
I can research through HSC and bring back more information.
That'd be good. Thank you.
So, you know, I'll jump in just because, you know, if we're talking about coordinator, is Springfield employees that are working in Eugene are contributing to public safety in Eugene. So, which we've brought that question up before, is get some sort of an idea of how much we're contributing, because I think that payroll tax is bringing in a couple, you know, I don't want to throw any numbers out there, but I know I've had residents contact me about the fact that they're paying, you know, husband and wife both contributing to Eugene's payroll tax. And so since that, you know, they're basically taxation without representation, at least to know what that money is and where it's going. Because it is being contributed by Springfield employees.
Yes, I've asked and I haven't gotten any figures yet.
Okay, great. Leonard, and then
Thanks, Mayor. So I am definitely in favor of the grant to the Emerald Art Center because we've been working hand in glove with them, at least since I've been here. They've been an enormous asset to the city. On square one, was the 60,000 the entirety of the money that we were planning to give them this year?
you know, Leonard, I think you need to look at the application because they wanted a tax break for 10 years. They wanted the SDCs waived. There's about 4 or 5 things. They wanted each of the homeowners separately to apply for SHOP, first-time home buyer program. So there were a lot of other dollars, I think, that were built into that, which is why, you know, I would like to see them go to the CDBG process where there's more fleshing out of the actual request so that, you know, I agree that, you know, they've got a great idea, but is to have a sense of exactly what that would be. But I want to say the 60,000 isn't all that the city would be contributing.
Okay. I was just going to say that the CDBG money could lead to more than what we were originally planning to allocate, and provided that that money actually comes through, I'm for just waiting and taking another bite at the apple with the CDBG fund. Thank you.
Okay. Steve.
I support the Emerald Art Center. I believe the others, because of the situation right now, are just going to have to find another way or be put off.
Okay. Other feedback about that? Okay. Joe.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to go piggyback what you're saying is that I think that we really need to put some effort towards looking at that Eugene payroll tax that I believe the citizens of Springfield have a right to that money, because that is not paying for any services, at least mostly not paying for any services for them. And that I think, frankly, that could be a great funding source for our cameras. So there you go.
You just have to get Eugene Council to agree to do that.
Well,
So, okay.
well, you know, publicly call them on it. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So I think with that, because we've gone obviously way over time, is Nate, do you have enough direction to put together what we're going to look at for public comment next week?
I do. Just a quick recap is we're going to include a $12,000 ad for the Emerald Art Center. And then we are going to, from the reduction proposal, take all the reductions with the exception of the body worn cameras, which we are going to remove from this proposal, looking at roughly $490,000 in reductions.
Yes, I'm looking for head nods from everybody
Yes.
that
Yep.
that's what
Yes.
we're agreeing to. Okay,
Yes, and-
Joe.
Sorry, and Nate, please, it sounds like, you know, you just said we're gonna look at the reduction, and then you mentioned except for the body worn cameras type thing. I just want to make it clear that the body worn cameras are not part of the reduction in our budget and that they are back in. After the vote. After the vote.
Yes, they've always been in, and so you would have had to take an action to pull them out in terms of the
Okay.
budget. So we
Thank
are
you so
removing
much.
them from consideration.
Okay,
And-
just want
Also, for Councilor Van Gordon, I received a text during our conversation today for the ambulance fund. We had a double GEMT payment in FY20 because it took a while for us to get our application submitted. So that included multiple years, but there will only be one GEMT payment in outer years. So that's partly for the spike in current revenues and why it's down in future years. And then no longer processing fire med for other districts as well, and that's reduced our revenues. And then we lost revenue from billing clients. So those would be the explanations for the lowered revenues in the outer years. Does that help or answer the question you had, or do you need more information?
I got about 5 more questions, but I will put them in an email.
All right, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, so with that, I think we've given all the direction that we needed to do with the budget for tonight. And it will come back to us as a document that we are going to be ready to take under consideration. Nate, it is a public hearing next week.
That is correct. So there will be an opportunity for business from the audience.
Okay, great. Okay.
Comments
So
from the audience.
yes. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the work session. The council does have an executive session that is going to follow immediately after I close out the work session. So I'm closing the work session now.
Mayor, I have this closed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this GoToWebinar for everyone. If you go into your council calendars, it will have the link to your GoToMeetings executive session. I
Okay.
need about 5 minutes to be able to get in there myself so that you can get in. So if Mayor, with your permission, if we can take a 5-minute intermission
Yeah.
to allow me the technology, and then you will go through your council calendars, the link to the GoToMeetings on your calendar invite.
Do we get
Okay.
popcorn for the
Okay.
intermission?
Yeah, we want popcorn and I
Absolutely.
better turn on a couple of lights here. I'm going to be sitting in the dark. Okay.
I'm gonna be
All righty.
eat a hot dog.
Okay. 5
Thank you.
minutes.
5 minutes.
I will end it now. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.